Greetings and salutations, my dear viewers, and welcome. This will be the first video of my Saltmaster's Guide, and this will be my Saltmaster's Guide to Warhammer 40,000. And to start with, we are going to be talking about the basic rules of Warhammer 40,000. So, where shall we begin, eh? Well, let's start with the basic rules. And we'll also discuss detachments. So, Warhammer 40,000 is a tabletop skirmish wargame. It's one of the more popular ones in the market, and mostly because of Games Workshop's aggressive, rulership of the market, and also because of the fact that there's several Warhammer 40,000 games out there, such as the likes of Dawn of War. If you played Dawn of War, it'll be pretty similar, except this is more tabletop-y and nerdy. So, here's the thing, first off. You're going to need two things. A tape measure and some dice. Distances in 40K are measured in inches between the closest points of the bases of the models that you're measuring to and from. If the model does not have a base, such is the case with many vehicles, measure to the closest point from the vehicle's hull instead. You may measure distances whenever you'd like. It doesn't matter what you're doing it for, you can always do it. Warhammer 40,000 also uses dice, 6-sided dice to be exact, sometimes abbreviated to D6. Some rules refer to 2d6, 3d6, 4d6, whatever. And that's how many d6 that you roll, and add to the results together. If the roll has you rolling for a d3, roll a dice and have the total. When having the total of any dice roll, round fractions up before applying modifiers to the result. All modifiers are cumulative. If a dice roll of 3 is required, for example, this is abbreviated to 3+. Meanwhile, the most important aspects of the game aren't just in the tools, but also in the data sheets and whatnot. The rules in all models' rules are within the datasheet, or at least the basic information. The characteristics for them are within there as well. And models move and fight in units made up of one or more models. A unit must be set up and finish any sort of move as a group, with every model within 2 inches horizontally and 6 inches vertically of at least one other model from their unit, and this is known as unit coherency. If anything causes a unit to split up during the battle, it must reestablish its unit coherency the next time it moves. Meanwhile, the battle round consists of the following: movement phase, psychic phase, shooting phase, charge phase, fight phase, morale phase. Once a player's turn is ended, the opponent begins their next turn, consisting of the same phases. After both players complete their turn, the battle round has been completed and the next turn begins, until the game is concluded. So, with that being said, let's talk about the movement phase. And in case you're wanting to read along, well, you can find this as the Warhammer 40,000 Battle Primer. Should be on the Warhammer 40,000 site, or Games Workshop site, so look into that. Movement is pretty simple. You pick one of your units and move each model in that unit until you've moved all the models you want to. You can then pick up another model to move until you've moved as many of your models as you wish. No model can be moved more than once in each movement phase without something special. A model can be moved in any direction to a distance in inches equal to or less than the move characteristic in its datasheet. No part of the movement model's base or hull can move further than this. It cannot be moved through other models or through other terrain features such as walls, but can be removed vertically to climb or traverse any scenery. If the datasheet for a model says it can fly, it can move across models and terrain as if they aren't there. Some models that have fly can have two values. The first is the minimum speed. This must be the speed that you go at, that you start at. The second is the maximum speed. No part of the model's base can be moved further than this. If a model cannot make its minimum move or is forced to move off the battlefield, the model has either stalled or crashed or has been forced to abandon the battle. Enemy models are friendly. All models in the same army are friendly models. Models controlled by an opposing player are enemy models. We have a model in the movement phase. It may not be moved within 1 inch of any enemy models. Units starting the movement phase within 1 inch of an enemy unit can either remain stationary or fall back. If you choose to fall back, the unit must end its move more than 1 inch away from enemy units. If a unit falls back, it cannot advance or charge later. A unit that falls back cannot shoot back later that turn unless it can fly. When you pick a unit to move in the movement phase, you can also declare it will advance. Roll a dice and add the result to the move characteristic. The unit that advances cannot shoot or charge later that turn without exceptions. The psychic phase is pretty basic as well. Some models are known as psychers. These units can manifest their otherworldly abilities and attempt to deny other mages. The powers a psyker knows and the number of powers they can attempt to manifest or deny each psychic phase are detailed on their data sheet. Unless stated otherwise, psychers all know the smite power listed below. Some know other powers instead of or in addition to smite. The model's datasheet and other supplementary rules will make this known. If a psyker generates their powers before the battle, do so immediately before either player starts or deploy their army. I'll go over smite once we finish talking about the other basics. A psyker can manifest a power they know by taking a psychic test. To do so, roll 2d6. If the total is equal to or lower than that power's warp charge value, the power is successfully manifested. A psyker cannot manifest the same psychic power more than once a turn. Psychers can also attempt to resist the psychic power that has been manifested by an enemy model within 24 inches by taking a Deny the Witch test. This takes place immediately even though it is not your turn. To do so, roll 2d6. If the total is greater than the result of the psychic test, it has been negated and its effects are negated. Only one attempt to deny each successfully manifested psychic power can be made each turn, regardless of the number of powers you have within 24 inches of the enemy model manifesting the psychic power. That being said, there is another way this can fail. If you roll a double 1 or a double 6 when taking a psychic check, then you will immediately suffer perils of the warp. The psyker suffers D3 mortal wounds as the forces of the demonic haunted warp claw at their mind. If the psyker is slain by the perils of the warp, the power they were attempting to manifest automatically fails and each unit within 6 inches immediately suffers D3 mortal wounds as the Psyker is dragged into the warp or else detonates in a burst of empiric feedback. And then you resolve the psychic power. Basically, you deal with all the rules with that power. So let's go over Smite. Every Psyker in the game has Smite. It's a warp charge of 5, and if manifested, the closest visible enemy unit within 18 inches of the Psyker suffers D3 mortal wounds. If the psychic result is more than 10, they suffer D6 instead. This is pretty amazing for a basic psychic power, and you should learn to use this wisely. Next is the shooting phase. First, you choose your unit. Second, you choose your target. And third, you choose your ranged weapon. Depending on the weapon that you're using, it'll have a specific characteristic. And how it will shoot or whatnot will be dependent on what it says. That being said, it should also be noted that some models are characters. You cannot shoot characters if they are not the closest model. But this does not apply to characters with a wounds characteristic of 10 or higher, because they're big. And big guts, big models mean big guts. Rip and tear until it is done. Anyway, weapon types. There's 5 types of ranged weapons: assault, heavy, rapid fire, grenade, and pistol. A model shooting one of these weapons can make a number of attacks equal to the number written on its profile. For example, a model firing Assault 1 can make 1 attack with that weapon. A model firing a Heavy 3 weapon can make 3 attacks. If a weapon has more than 1 attack, it must make the same number of attacks against the same enemy unit. Each weapon type of ranged weapon also has a rule, depending on the situation, might affect the accuracy or when it can be fired. So let's take a look. Assault weapons can fire even if it advanced earlier that term, representing weapons that can be fired from the hip. If it does so, you must subtract 1 from any hit-to-hit rolls made when firing that weapon this turn. Heavy weapons must subtract 1 from any to hit rolls made when firing that weapon that turn if you move. This doesn't make sense on vehicles, but for infantry it perfectly does. Rapid fire weapons double the number of attacks it makes if its target is within half of the weapon's maximum range. This essentially represents the likes of assault rifles. Grenades are only able to be used once per unit per model. No. Each time a unit shoots, a single model in the unit that equipped with grenades can throw one instead of firing any other weapon. And lastly, pistols. Pistols can be fired even if there's enemies within 1 inch of its own unit, but can only target the enemy models when it does so. In such circumstances, the model can shoot its pistol even if other friendly units are within 1 inch of the same enemy unit. Each time with a model equipped with both a pistol and another type of ranged weapon shoots, it can either fire with its pistol or with all of its other weapons. Choose which it'll fire before making hit rolls. So, and remember, the most important rule of 40k is that if you don't know how something should go down, discuss it with your opponent. Be nice. Anyway, let's resolve attacks. Attacks can be made one at a time, though in some cases you can roll for multiple attacks together. The following sequence is used to make attacks one at a time. To hit, every time a model makes an attack, roll a die. This die will, if this die is equal to or greater than the attacking model's ballistic skill, then it scores a hit. If not, the attack fails and the attack sequence ends. A roll of 1 always fails, no matter what modifiers that may apply. Wound rolls will always depend on the model's being used, and it will depend as such. Attacker strength, if the attacker's strength is double that of its opponent, then you will need a 6. You will need a 2+. If the strength is greater but not double, then it's a 3. If it's equal, 4+. If lower, 5+. And if the strength is half of the toughness, 6+. You will never need to roll lower than a 1. You will never need to roll higher than a 6, and you can never roll lower than a 2. If a target successfully wounds a target, the player commanding the target unit allocates the wound to any model within the unit. The chosen model does not have to be visible or within range. You then have that model take saving throws. Depending on the weapon, it may have armor penetration. For example, if a model has armor penetration -1, then then 1 is subtracted from the saving throw roll. If the result is equal to or greater than the save characteristic, then the damage is prevented and the sequence ends. If the result is less than the save characteristic, then the saving throw fails and the model suffers damage. A roll always fails. Now then, we should also talk about some other aspects. Invulnerable saves are important because some models have these instead or in addition to regular armor. If a model has an invulnerable save, it is not modified by the armor penetration value. This is important depending on the weapons that you're dealing with, and they are quite valuable to the units that have them. Terrain and cover allows models to have a +1 to its saving throw to represent the cover received from terrain. This does not work in the fight phase, however. Damage is then inflicted. If any of those are denied, then you inflict damage. A model loses 1 wound for each point of damage suffered. If a model is wounded all the way down to 0, then it is removed from play. If a model loses several wounds from a single attack and is destroyed, any excess damage by that attack is lost and has no effect. Well, with some exception. The mortal wounds is the sole exception to this. Some attacks deal mortal wounds. These are so powerful that nothing in the game will withstand their fury. Each mortal wound inflicts 1 damage upon the target. Do not make a wound roll or a saving throw. Just allocate it as you would a normal wound. Excess damage from attacks that inflict mortal wounds can be allocated within the rest of the unit. So, if you kill a model, it will leak, essentially. Next, we have the charge phase. The charge phase has you choosing one of your units within 12 inches of the enemy to charge. You may not choose a unit that has advanced or fell back this turn, nor one that has charged within one, nor one that has started the charge phase within 1 inch of the enemy. Then you choose your target, and then they commit Overwatch. Each time a charge is declared, the target unit can immediately fire Overwatch several times. Can immediately fire Overwatch at the would-be attacker. It can fire Overwatch multiple times a turn, but it cannot do so if there are any enemy models within 1 inch of it. Overwatch is resolved like a shooting attack, albeit one done in the enemy's charge phase, using all the same rules except a 6 is always required for a successful hit roll, irrespective of the ballista skill. Last but not least, once Overwatch is resolved, roll 2d6. Each model in the charging unit moves up to this number. They have to finish within 1 inch. No models from the charging unit can move within 1 inch of an enemy unit that was not a target of its charge. If this is impossible, the charge fails and no models in the charging unit charges that phase. Now just continue charging. If anything is within 1 inch of the enemy models, they can be chosen to fight. This can includes all units, not just those controlled by the player. All units that charge fight first. The player whose turn it is picks the order in which these units fight. After all charging units have fought, the players alternate choosing eligible units to fight with. After this, a fight is also resolved in the following ways. You may then, first you pile in. You move each model up to 3 inches closer to each model. Next, you then pick an enemy unit, or units for that matter, for its attacks. If a model can make more than one close combat attack, it can split them between eligible target units as you wish. If they have more than one model, each can target separate units. In each case, declare how you will split the unit's close combat attacks. The number of attacks is determined by the attack's characteristic. You roll for 1 dice for each attack made. So if a model has 2 attacks, it can make 2 close combat attacks, and therefore 2 dice. Each time a model makes a close combat attack, it uses a melee weapon. A weapon model is equipped with are described in its datasheet. If the datasheet does not list any melee weapon, then the model is assumed to have a close combat weapon. If a weapon is chosen, has more than one, choose which one it'll use before rolling the dice. If they can use multiple attacks, then you can choose which weapons deal what attacks. Declare how you'll divide them before any dice are rolled. You then resolve them the same way you would a shooting attack. And when there's models within near the end of the turn, for units that have taken lost models, take morale checks. To do so, roll a dice and add the number of models from the unit that have been slain to that result. If the result is higher than the leadership characteristic, the test is failed. For each point, one model from that unit, from each point that the test is failed by, one model must flee and is removed from play. Meanwhile, let's talk about transports real quick. These are basically noted. These basically carry units to the front line. All transports have a transport capacity on their datasheet. This determines how many friendly models and of what type they can carry. A model's transport capacity can never be exceeded. If all models end their move within 3 inches of a friendly transport, they can embark upon it. They can disembark. They can disembark at the start of any movement phase. They can do everything else normally from that point on. If a transport is destroyed with units embarked on it, units immediately disembark before the transport model is removed, but you must also roll 1 dice for each model you just set up on the battlefield. For each roll, a model that just disembarked is slain. Moving on, moving on, moving on, moving on, moving on. Datasheets are pretty much self-explanatory and give you everything you'll need to know about your every model has a datasheet, and you determine what they do with those datasheets using those datasheets. Within 40K, it should be noted that each model, you then can choose a mission. But before you do so, warlord traits are important. If you have mustered your army, one of your models must become the warlord. If the warlord is a character, it can use a warlord trait, a preferred tactic or personal ability. The default warlord traits are as follows. Legendary Fighter gives it an additional attack in its characteristic until the end of this ensuing fight phase. Inspiring Leaders allow the warlord to give friendly units within 6 inches to add 1 to their leadership. And lastly, Tenacious Survivor rolls a dice each time the warlord loses a wound. On a 6, the warlord shrugs off the damage and does not have the wound. Lastly is a specific kind of mission that almost any player can have, known as Only War. You must muster an army using the miniatures in your collection. You can use any model in your army. You then set up a battlefield and terrain. Both players will roll off to see who will deploy first. And to see what objectives will be rolled for. The objectives are as follows. Slay and Secure is where you basically is where you hold objectives depending on who's controlling it. Players also earn D3 victory points for slaying the warlord. Ancient Relic has you taking on a specific objective marker on the battlefield. Whoever controls it gets 6 victory points. Domination has you obtaining 1 victory point to the player who controls it each turn. Keep a running score from turn to turn. Once the victory conditions have been determined, you then deploy. You then determine the deployment. The player who rolls good the player who did not roll on the primary objectives then divides the battlefield into 2 equal-sized halves. Their opponent decides which half is their own and which half is the other player's. power levels are pretty important because this is how you determine A, if your forces are equal, and B, who becomes the underdog. If whoever has the lower power level is the underdog. If the power level difference is 10 to 19, the underdog gets 1 command reroll. If the difference is 20 to 29, the underdog gets 2 command rerolls, and so on. Each command reroll can be used once at any point during the battle to reroll a single dice. First turn gets the first. Underdog gets the first turn. The battle lasts for 5 rounds or until one army has slain all its foes. And of course, you can also determine objectives. However, this is not all there is to the story. One important aspect of 40k is something known as Battleforged. So, what is Battleforged exactly? A Battleforged army is pretty simple. Command point, you get, by being Battleforged, you get 3 command points. And these command points can be used for all sorts of things. Primarily stratagems. However, one of the most basic stratagems that you can fulfill is the most simple one of all. This is known as the command reroll. One of the most simple is known as the command reroll, in which you reroll any single dice. The other is known as, others include counteroffensive, used right after a charge the enemy has fought. You can select one of your own units and fight with it next. Lastly is insane bravery. You can automatically pass a single morale check. But how do you get command points? Well, the first things first. If you are going in Battleforged, you will get 3 command points basic. Some units can also give you more, but you're probably going to be focusing on however, detachments will be your primary way of dealing with how you get Battleforged. And for now, let's discuss the way your detachments interact with command points. Oh, what's that? That's the most basic detachment of all, the patrol. The patrol has the lowest requisite necessities of any detachment in the game. It only requires a single troop and a single HQ, and can take 2 extra troops, an extra HQ, up to 2 elites, up to fast attacks, 2 heavy supports, and 2 flyers. And dedicated transports can be taken for every choice. Its only restriction is that each thing has to be in the same faction. But that's okay. This isn't the worst thing. So, this does not give you any bonuses, but this is the kind of thing that you'll want to deal with. That is your that is your most basic introduction to 40k. Next is the battalion detachment. This is a little bit more hefty And to anyone who's ever played 40k before, this should look pretty familiar. Sort of. Compared to regular armies, the the battalion gives you 2 HQs and 3 troops as its requirement. However, it also gives you 3 extra command points. You also get access to 3 more troops, 6 elites, 3 fast attack, 3 heavy support, and 2 flyers. You should use this one. I mean, this is probably the most basic force organization that you'll use, and is probably going to be the one that serves you the best. But what if you want to go bigger? What if you want to say, go big or go home? This is when you call on the brigade. The brigade is the absolute biggest deployment that you can get, with a hefty requirement of 6 troops, 3 HQs, and 3 slots necessary from elites, fast attack, heavy support, and flyers. Even more importantly, elites get 5 extra slots, troops get 6 extra slots, fast attack and heavy support gets 2, and flyers are optional, but can get up to 2. But for almost double the force org chart from the previous, you also get 9 command points. So go big, go home. Go big or go home is basically the goal of this detachment. So, but of course, those are not the only options. Next is the Vanguard detachment. This is an elites-based detachment, giving you access to 6 elites, giving you access to 3 elites and 1 HQ as a tax. This also gives you +1 command point. Everything else on there is optional, as you can see, and you can take up to 6 elites. It doesn't give you any more than what the original Force Org gives you, but it's still one of the least taxing Force Orgs. Spearhead is the same thing except heavy support. You can have up to you start with 3 and need 1 HQ, but can have up to 6 heavy support and a few things in the other slots. You're going to notice that each of these detachments are going to give you +1 command point, or at least the basic ones with the basic fast attack and heavy support and whatnot. Outrider gives you fast attack. Same as the Spearhead, except fast attack. Not much that I need to say about this one. Next is something a little weird. The Super Heavy Auxiliary does not have any restrictions nor command benefits. You just deploy what is known as a Lord of War, a super heavy unit. There are no penalties nor benefits to using this. It's your most reliable way of getting a super heavy on the battlefield. But if you want a benefit, sure, I can give you one. This is through the Super Heavy Detachment. All units must be from the same faction, and this gives you 3 additional command points. Not many factions can do this, but it's pretty much your biggest bow. It's a pretty big boost. Just don't be surprised when people want to strangle you for having 3 of those. The Air Wing is also kind of a slightly dickish move. It only gives you +1 command point, but you can take up to 5 flyers with this. It's not bad, all things considered. Next is the Fortification. This allows you to have up to 3 fortifications, but you need at least 1. No restrictions, no benefits. And lastly is the auxiliary. Well, there's also the Supreme Command, but that's basically a HQ party. This is weird. You can take anything from any slot. But each time you get one, you lose 1 command point for each auxiliary detachment. These are deducted from your total after applying all bonuses from other sources. Yikes. Only do this if you absolutely positively need an extra unit. And that just about wraps up this particular podcast. Next time we will be talking about the first codex that has been released, Codex Space Marines. Until then, good night, farewell, and good luck.